Welcome everyone to this first episode in our series on US-China dialogue. I'm Neysun Mahboubi from the Center for the Study of Contemporary China at the University of Pennsylvania, and I'm here with my friend and co-host, Professor CHEN Dingding. Dingding, introduce yourself.
Hi everyone, I'm Dingding Chen from Guangzhou, China. I teach international relations at Wuhan University in Guangzhou.
And we are both interested in facilitating dialogues between our American and Chinese friends and interlocutors on different issues that are key in the relationship. This is an idea that CHEN Dingding came up with, and I thought it was a wonderful idea because I think, if anything, at this moment, having these kinds of dialogues between American and Chinese interlocutors is more important than ever. Dingding, why don't you say a few words about why you thought this was a good idea to do?
Sure, I thought, like maybe everybody else for the past year and a half, we've been all very much limited by the COVID-19, not being able to travel around, to do conferences, workshops like we used to do. So it's a great loss because we as scholars really needed to get together and have, the kind of face-to-face conversation, which is not, really available. But with the new technologies like, the virtual meetings available, maybe we can achieve something. So I think, that's the basic idea for particularly US-China, relations experts to explore and exchange ideas, given how, how intense the relationship is these days.
Yeah, and again, I thought it was a wonderful idea, and I'm so happy to be doing with you. To clarify for everyone, we're doing this in our personal capacities. We're not doing this institutionally. We are not funded by anyone. We're doing this entirely because we both want to facilitate these kinds of dialogues. We hope to have a series of these, starting with today's dialogue on trade issues. And if you subscribe to our YouTube channel, you'll be able to see the videos as they come up, and we'll let you know about them. Anything else you want to say, Dingding, before we get going?
I think we can get going.
Okay, great. So let's bring our panelists for today up on screen. We could not be more delighted to have this excellent group for our discussion today on trade issues in the US-China relationship. We're just going to briefly introduce them, and I think what we thought we might do is I'll introduce the Chinese participants, and Dingding will introduce the American participants. So let me first welcome our Chinese participants. First, SHI Jingxia, professor at Renmin University Law School. Before that, she was the dean at the University of International Business and Economics Law School. She is also a graduate of Yale Law School, LL.M, and J.S.D, where we got to know each other many years ago. And she is one of China's leading experts on the WTO and on trade issues generally. Welcome. Thanks so much for joining us today, Josie. And we also have Dr. ZHOU Mi, who is a senior research fellow in the Chinese Academy of International Trade and Economic Cooperation. He is also a prolific author on trade issues, and especially the bilateral trade relationship between the US and China. He primarily researches international trade and economic cooperation. So thank you so much for joining us as well, Dr. ZHOU Mi.
Okay, let's introduce our two wonderful speakers from the US side. First, we have Anna Ashton, who is the Vice President for Government Affairs at the US-China Business Council, where she manages advocacy on behalf of the 260 American companies with business interests in China. And Anna has served as China analyst in both public and private sectors before, including the Department of Defense, the US Chamber of Commerce, and the US-China Economic and Security Review Commission. And also we have excellent scholar Simon Lester, who is the co-founder of the website worldtradelaw.net and the China Trade Monitor. Previously, he worked for the trade law practice of a Washington, D.C. law firm as a legal affairs officer at the appellate body secretary of the World Trade Organization. and also as the Associate Director of the Cato Institute Trade Policy Center. Welcome.
I'm so happy we have so many lawyers here today. Anna, I actually didn't know you also went to law school, so I'm thrilled that we have 4 lawyers out of 6. I hope ZHOU Mi and Dingding are okay with all this legal talent. That's part of our discussion today.
Yes, in my family, we have 3 lawyers in my big family, so I'm fine.
So let's launch into the discussion. Our goal today is to have a free-flowing discussion about trade issues in the U.S.-China relationship. And I think maybe an interesting place to start would be this announcement, or I guess it wasn't really an announcement, it was more reporting from the Wall Street Journal that the U.S. Trade Representative's Office is thinking about launching a Section 301 investigation into Chinese subsidies practices. This news came just a day after that phone call between President Biden and President Xi, where the idea of that phone call seemed to be to try to lower tensions, or at least set some guardrails around how far tensions can spill over in this relationship. But it seems as if these trade tensions are still quite robust, notwithstanding a lot of the criticism about the tariffs. Even Secretary of Treasury Janet Yellen has said that the tariffs are hurting American consumers. There is this possibility that USTR is going to now do another set of tariffs out of this Section 301 investigation, having to do with even deeper issues with the Chinese economic relationship. So why don't maybe I'll ask Simon first, and then everyone else as you want to weigh in on what you make of that announcement. What do you think is the prospect of something like that happening, and what are the implications for this trade agreement that was signed in the Trump administration that we call the Phase 1 trade agreement? What's going on here?
So having followed, 4 years of Trump trade policy, it's natural, I think, to be a little wary of this kind of talk about another Section 301 investigation. We just did all this, even if you're somebody who believes that China has trade practices that need to be dealt with somehow, we look at the Trump administration's use of Section 301 and the tariffs, and I think that most people will conclude they didn't work that well. I mean, they left us with tariffs, but most of the practices people in the U.S. and elsewhere are concerned about with China are still in place. So they don't work. So why do it again? But I do think it's important to keep in mind that Section 301 is not necessarily about tariffs. I mean, that's certainly one option. If once you do a Section 301 investigation, there are a number of options, and one of them is to impose tariffs. But there are other things that could be done. So a Section 301 investigation could lead to a complaint to the World Trade Organization. Now, we have problems that we may get to about WTO dispute settlement, but if that could be resolved, then it could be the prelude to a case at the WTO, or it could be the prelude to negotiations at the WTO. So when we talk about subsidies, the U.S., Japan, and the EU have already been talking about cooperating on subsidies, coming up with new rules on subsidies. So the Section 301 investigation really it doesn't have to lead to tariffs, and it could be a way for the Biden administration to give itself more time to figure out what to do exactly about China. Many of us who have criticized the Trump administration and are looking for something more positive out of the Biden administration would really like them to tell us what they're going to do about China. But it's important to recognize that they have some difficult political constraints, that they can't just jump into a China policy immediately. And so maybe a Section 301 investigation would buy them a little time to figure out what exactly they're going to do. You mentioned the Phase 1 trade deal. I mean, that's sort of one of the big lingering effects of the Trump administration's trade policies. The Biden administration probably doesn't quite know what to do with that. The Phase 1 trade deal had these purchase commitments in there that most people thought were unrealistic, and they haven't been met. So, for the Biden administration, I think they have a difficult task on their hands trying to figure out what to do with the legacy they've been left with. And, I think if you look at a Section 301 investigation, which is just a rumor at this point, I mean, it hasn't actually been started, you can think of it as a way for them to take some more time to gather their thoughts and figure out an approach, sort of on their own, but also possibly in conjunction with other allies.
And I should just jump in before we invite the others to weigh in here that this news came as a lot of people are growing increasingly anxious about finding out what's the result of the China review that the USTR is doing. And it seemed as if maybe this got so much attention because it's the first thing we've heard that sort of indicated some kind of consequence or some kind of result out of that trade review. I don't know. I mean, you're very plugged in DC. Do you have a sense of what's going on with the trade review? Is there something coming in the near future?
I haven't heard anything. And I think you're right. I mean, the fact that this was something got everybody excited. All the questions that when I've heard the Biden administration asked about what the plan is with regard to China, the only answer I've ever heard is it's still under review. So no, I don't think I mean, maybe Anna knows more, but no, I haven't heard anything. And that's why I think, we got so excited because, well, maybe there's something here, with the Section 301 rumor. But no, so I have no inside information on that.
So ZHOU Jingxia, rather, I'm sorry. We've known each other so long, I sometimes use your English name. Jingxia and ZHOU Mi, do you guys have anything to say about how this looks from the Chinese side?
Okay, sure. So first, I fully agree with Simon and Anna's observations. What first bumped into my head is, oops, does this mean that the Biden administration is following Trump's trade policy towards China? We know the Section 301 investigation does hurt China economically speaking. However, it has also many negative sides on the US as well, such as violating WTO rules as a unilateral action. And more importantly, it's hard to accomplish the goal and even also hurt the interests of American people. The possible investigation may result from the failure of bilateral diplomacy with China since Biden took the office. It seems to me that compared to Trump, which tried to strongly decouple the two economies, the Biden administration has not been quite clear on its China trade policy. And whether this investigation, if launched, will lead to more tariffs on Chinese goods remains to be seen. So just as Simon mentioned, a new Section 301 investigation into the economic impacts of Chinese subsidies may provide the Biden administration a pathway to retooling the US approach to China, including adjustment to tariffs on Chinese goods imposed by Trump, but quantifying those impacts could be a huge task. The scope of this investigation, if launched, would also be crucial in determining how much leverage the Biden administration might win from it. In any sense, apart from these considerations, to my personal great disappointed is that this investigation signifies more mistrust between the US and China. This is not a good sign for the two parties to deal with the ever-intensifying relationship developed from the past years. I'm afraid that a new round of trade war breaks out along with a new investigation by Biden administration. That would be very awful.
Yes, yeah. I think that I just finished an article about the subsidies of the United States, especially on agriculture. So it is interesting, that they have the similar time about the first year around August or September to initiate the 301 investigation toward China, like from Biden and Trump. So I think that is interesting. But actually, as Professor Shi has expressed, that the 301 is just unilateral actions. We have a lot of more choices to deal with the problem of subsidies. Actually, it happens everywhere in the world, especially after the COVID-19, we are seeing that more countries are trying to do better to support some part of their economies. So in my understanding, because it is not just the official statement from USTR or the White House, I still believe that we could try to deal with the conflicts or differences on the opinions of the rules of different kind of issues by negotiations or other kind of methods. And that will bring us more. As to the phase one agreement between China and the United States, we have observed it carefully. I think that all of us know that, especially in the first half year of 2021, we are seeing the bilateral trade, the import and export between the United States and China has increased largely. So I think that most of the consumers, the enterprises, even the farmers and the ranchers, they suffered a lot from the conflict between our two countries, like for the inflation or other issues. So I think that if we can do better to improve the certainty between our two economies, it will not only benefit us, but also benefit the world, because the global supply chain is so fragile, and we are seeing that if there are more impacts, it will become more dangerous, especially bad for the small and the least developed countries in the world. Yeah.
Okay, I think that's a terrific discussion so far, but maybe we can go back time a little bit and ask, how did we get here today? You know, we all maybe agree that maybe the Trump administration started all this trade war, but how exactly did we get here? And what were actually Trump's trade policies? And to what degree is the Biden administration really continuing the Trump's trade policies? Maybe I can start with Chinese scholars first. Professor SHI Jingxia, maybe?
Sure, thank you. We all see that Trump administration launched a trade war with China. He did it in typically very combative style, such as raising tariffs, hurling threats, sometimes reopening conflicts that had seemed already resolved. So under the Trump administration, free trade policy was actually out. American first protectionism was in. This is a very big shift. Trump sets his sights on shrinking America's vast or huge trade deficit and pledged to boost exports and to curb imports by imposing tariffs on Chinese goods. To that end, he fought with China, among other things. However, as we understand, the trade balance is just a poor measure of whether a particular set of trade policies or trade agreements is delivering benefits to the domestic people or not. The real reason, as pointed by many economists, is that Americans are spending more than they produce. So as a result, despite all the actions that drove his confrontational policies, the Trump administration failed to achieve the goal it set of reducing the American merchandise trade deficit. Actually, the Americans' trade deficit in goods and services exceeds what it was under President Obama. Furthermore, in response to Trump administration's trade policy, China retaliated with tariffs of their own, many of them targeting American farmers. Contrary to his assertions, Trump's tariffs have been paid by American importers, not foreign companies. So that cost is typically passed on consumers in the form of higher. In Chinese saying, this is harming others without a benefit to itself. For this sake, I do not hope to see that Biden administration continues in the same vein. I will stop here.
Okay, now let's turn to Simon. So Simon, in your view, in addition to tariffs, there were also export controls launched by the Trump administration, but of course now being continued by the Biden administration. How do you evaluate that aspect of the tension?
Mm.
Well, I'd like to look at the tariffs and the export controls together. So, I mean, it can be hard to get into the minds of politicians or anybody, but my reading of Trump and his U.S. Trade Representative Bob Lighthizer was that they are strong believers in the value of tariffs. They think protectionism is good. They look back fondly on the 19th century, late 19th century, when the U.S. wasn't subject to trade agreements, could impose high tariffs for the benefit of domestic industry. And it wasn't just about China. I mean, this relates to all other countries. They were critical of the Europeans, the Canadians, the Mexicans. So it's just sort of the strong belief that tariffs are good and will help the U.S. economy. On the other side of that, and this is the point you just mentioned, was export controls. So if you're a believer in reducing trade deficits, you would want more export. So export controls seem a little odd. But what you also had in the Trump administration was some security, experts, security people within the administration who were worried about turning over important technology to China. And so you had this tension there between the trade people wanting to reduce the trade balance, the trade deficit, and then the security people not wanting to give China our key technologies. What does the Biden administration now do with all of that? I think that ultimately the Biden administration will be seen as pulling back a bit on Trump's trade policies. I think that, we've seen early limited examples of that. So the Trump administration was blocking the appointment of a director general at the WTO. The Biden administration stopped blocking. We now have a WTO director general in place. The Biden administration is trying to negotiate with Europeans to at least scale back the Section 232 tariffs imposed on steel and aluminum imports. They're certainly not free traders, and they are ratcheting up protectionist trade policies in government procurement. But I think we'll see a slight pullback. On the export controls, it seems to me that we're in a state of things in the United States where the security concerns are about China are at a very high level, and they're not likely to go down at all. So I don't see much change. I don't anticipate much change in the approach to export controls and screening of foreign investments. And a lot of this stuff is not public, so it's hard to evaluate objectively. What exactly is the extent of the restrictions on exports or the restrictions on foreign investment. So it can be a little hard to measure this, but my sense is a lot of what the Trump administration put in place wasn't really what Trump and Lighthizer were after, and it was more the foreign policy establishment, the security establishment, and those people are all still there. They're still getting scrutiny from Congress who are still pushing for it. So I would say, to sum up, maybe pulling back slightly on Trump's protectionism, but export controls and security concerns will probably stay pretty constant under the Biden administration.
Can I jump in with a quick follow-up to Simon? I thought that was very interesting. The way you set this up is in the Trump administration, there was this tension between sort of the trade people and the security people. And, I think we can think of individuals in the Trump administration, Secretary of the Treasury Mnuchin, right? Clearly seemed to be wanting to facilitate the trade relationship. And then there were other people like, I don't know where Lighthizer would fit in, but certainly Peter Navarro or Matt Pottinger, who were more concerned about the security side. Is that tension still as robust in the Biden administration? Do we know the personnel who fall on one side or the other, or has there been some kind of a harmonization because it seems to me I can't think of the personalities being quite as sort of separated out as it seemed to be under the Trump administration?
Somebody could probably give you a rundown of the personnel. I'm not sure I can. What I see with the Biden administration is a shift to issues like climate change and human rights and labor rights. And those just suddenly have a much greater priority. So the security part is still there, I would think that that's constant. It's different people, but it's pretty similar. The trade concerns. I mean, there are people in the Trump administration who are protectionist and are trying to bring jobs back and all of that. It's sort of a different style and a different tone, and maybe to a slightly lesser extent. But really, I think the big thing is just a shift to all these other priority issues that just didn't exist in the Trump administration. And so, yeah, I wish I could give you that rundown. And I'd like to hear that rundown. Maybe Anna's about to give us that rundown. But yeah, but I don't know all those specific names and personalities.
I can't give that rundown either.
Okay.
but I can say, you know, the Biden administration definitely seems to put more emphasis on its recognition that there are shared interests that the U.S. and China have. But, you know, I think that we're looking at an administration that sees the relationship as having become more complex than it maybe used to be. Much like the Europeans, the Biden administration seems to talk about the US-China relationship in terms of areas of cooperation, areas of competition, and then areas where our interests are in conflict with each other. I think that's how Wendy Sherman recently put it after her trip to China. You know, as for how we got here, I think that there are several different factors that were at play, at least on the US side. One of them is a reassessment, like a reevaluation of the power dynamics in the relationship. It's just a reality that China is a far more powerful country politically and economically than it was in 2001 when it joined the WTO. And the United States has woken up to that and to the fact that our interests don't always align. And that has caused a shift in, I guess, accepted understandings of what the relationship has to offer and also the challenges it may present. Another factor is just pure politics. The reality is that during the 2016 campaign, both sides were talking tough on China, and both sides were focused on the idea that the trade relationship was fundamentally somehow unfair, especially to workers. And some of that was about appealing to the Rust Belt vote, the working class vote in the middle of the country that perceives itself to have been most harmed by the US-China trade relationship and by globalization. And then finally, there's the issue of domestic needs and this idea that in the United States, we need some organizing principle around which we can coalesce in order to get things done. And that's never been more the case than right now because our political situation is so divided. And so, you know, we seem to have chosen an external organizing principle, which is this competition and perhaps conflict with China. And I just wanted to make sure to underscore that we didn't just get here because of the Trump administration, and we're not just being driven on the US side now by the Biden administration. There is also Congress, which is a focus of a lot of my work. In the last Congress, the 116th Congress, there were 550 bills and resolutions that had a China angle. And this Congress, which only started in January of this year, so it still has, you know, almost a year and a half to go, there are already close to 300 China-related bills and resolutions. And to put that in perspective, after 9/11, during the 107th Congress, there were a total of 135 bills and resolutions with any sort of counter-terror focus. So there is a lot of angst and mobilization around this idea of a China challenge right now in Congress. That's driving a lot of things too.
Well, let's maybe turn now to thinking about what the Chinese response to all of this has been. I think maybe we could start with Dr. ZHOU Mi. You know, maybe you could tell us a little bit about how you perceive how the Chinese government has decided to proceed given the kind of approach that the Trump administration took and now the Biden administration is at least to a large extent continuing. You know, some of the things that, you know, it seems are relevant are this idea of dual circulation, which frankly, I don't understand, and I've never gotten a really good sense of it. So maybe you can help me understand what that
Yes.
means. And that's sort of internal to China. But the other type of thing is, it seems as if China is interested in developing trade relationships with other countries. Of course, we know about the BRI, and maybe you could say a word about that. But we also know that China has sort of invigorated the RCEP recently, and we just found out, I think yesterday, that China has formally applied to join the CPTPP, the Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership, which has gotten a lot of people talking about how that entire mechanism of the TPP had been designed by policymakers in DC as an approach to maybe contain China in an earlier administration. And now we're at a point today where the US doesn't seem likely to join, but China actually might want to join. So maybe you could start and then hear from the rest on what the Chinese response to all of this actions from the US side has been.
Yes, I think that there are several differences between Biden administration and the Trump administration. First, that Biden is not a new, I think, the friend of China, because he was the vice president in Obama time. So I think we have a lot of understanding, not only from China, but also from him, about each other, about the policies, different structure of the society, and what are the views of our society. So I think that it's no question that we should try to do some adjustment according to United States on the new policies and new attitudes. But in my own understanding, I think that United States has been and will always, or at least in the next few years or more time, to be one of the most important partners of China, because that United States has a very strong compatibility of the structure of the different kind of industries, and we have a lot of complementary factors to cooperate with. So even in the so-called trade war between our two countries, I also talked with the enterprises. If you have any opportunities you can grasp in United States, you should try to explore it. And I also see a lot of friends in the United States want to still doing business with China. So I think that the dual circulation is a kind of very important ideas of what we should do in the future. Actually, I think it has something to do with the relation between our two countries, but it is not all because of that, because China has grown up as one of the biggest economies in the world, and our GDP in 2020 has around 20% of the world economy. So I think that we have a very big market. We want to support the market, not only by other countries, but also by our own enterprises and farmers or different kind of workers. So I think that for the dual circulation is the idea that we should try to develop our domestic market, not only to supply the updated demand from the people living here, but also try to reduce the gaps between the different regions in China, between the eastern, the middle, and the west part of China. And we should try to reach the common reach target of our society. As for that, I believe that we are needing to do something to change our mode of development, because before the financial crisis, we depend everything on the developed country like United States consumption. But while we are seeing that the world is changing and a lot of impacts on the development, the strength of the developed countries. So I think that we have some common sense with the developing countries along the Belt and Road Initiative, the regions. I think that we should try to cooperate with them for the urbanization, for the industrialization. Actually, we didn't want to, reject the United States enterprises or even government to be involved in the BRI. That is a kind of idea for all the countries. If we want to improve the infrastructure, sustainability, and all the related development, there are a lot of common interests between our two countries. So in a word, I mean that for us, we are not trying to confront the United States. We are trying to cooperate not only on the climate change, on the denuclearization, and also on other kind of cooperation to strengthen the supply chain to make it more resilient, or trying to develop better agreements like CPTPP, or even to involve that, because that the world is changing very quickly. And there are a lot of new elements like the digital economy, like a different kind of cooperation demands that, especially after the COVID-19, there will be a lot of potentials.
Maybe Jingxia, you could add a little bit. I'm especially interested what you think of this idea that China will join the CPTPP. What are the prospects of that, and how do you think that relates to what China is doing with RCEP and with BRI?
Okay, sure. So first, regarding so-called dual circulation, simply speaking, it means domestic circulation and international circulation. So actually it means, self-reliance. It's traditionally, China used it in the last century to develop, in its early stage to develop its economy. Right now, China's emphasis on growth through exports is being blocked by a focus on domestic demand as the internet. This is because the international trade environment becomes less supportive than ever. And also the COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted the risks and vulnerabilities inherent in deep trade integration, spurring countries, including China, to reduce her reliance on other economies. So this is, I think, it's very straightforward logic. In terms of Belt and Road Initiative, I would like to emphasize that the BRI actually illustrates the transformative geopolitical implications of China's rise. Despite its changing contours, this series of major infrastructure and development projects designed to connect Euro-Asian countries or regions together is a coherent enterprise of unprecedented scale. The BRI actually aims to stabilize China's Western peripheries, rekindle its economies, propel non-Western international economic institutions, gain influence in other countries, and diversify trade suppliers while circumventing the US pivot to Asia. But of course, the BRI's perspective of success are subject to many unknowns. On the other hand, the US still possesses enormous assets to maintain its predominance, including military primacy, multiple alliance, powerful Western-led international organizations, and so on. For RCEP, we see RCEP actually covers around 30% of global GDP, as well as around 30% of the world's population. So the RCEP is so far is the largest RTA in the world. By eliminating tariffs and dismantling trade barriers among its members, the RCEP helps to further expand market opportunities within the member countries. The RCEP, of course, more relevant with our topic here is that the RCEP has implications on the power rivalry between China and the US. So ironically, the impetus for concluding the RCEP actually come from the US-led negotiation of TPP, which aim to reduce Asia countries' economic reliance on China and build the US-driven global supply chains in the region. So the ASEP promises to bolster China's driven supply chains as part of global trade, especially given the ASEP's rules of origin. The competition between the US and China led supply chains will continue, particularly in the world of technology and the Internet of Things. The ongoing competition between China and the US for the economic dominance will not end with the Biden administration. So for the TPP, just as the US-led TPP negotiations helped to invigorate the negotiation of the ASEP, the conclusion of the ASEP could dynamically pressure the Biden administration to consider joining the CPTPP, particularly after, yesterday when China formally announced its application to join the CPTPP. So right now, I think a key issue for the Biden administration will be how to manage the interface of the US and the Chinese economic system, particularly in the so-called Indo-Pacific region. I will stop here and leave more discussion later.
So yeah, I mean, this is a terrific, I found it very, interesting, also striking that China now is, applying for the CPTPP membership, whereas the US is not really seeking any kind of, multilateral trading framework. What's the thinking behind? I mean, I understand the Trump administration not interested in multilateral mechanisms, but for the Biden administration, it's very surprising. So maybe Simon and Anna, what's the real thinking behind, the Biden administration? Maybe it's the whole political, environment, domestic politics within the U.S. People, the voters don't like, multilateral trading mechanisms anymore. Is that true, Simon?
Well, I think you've hit on the right term. I was about to say it's domestic politics. I don't know if it's so much the voters overall. I think that political leaders believe that certain important constituencies don't like trade deals, and therefore those political leaders don't want to go in that direction. If it's hard to know what to make of polling, but if you read surveys of Americans' views on trade, they're actually more pro-trade than they were previously by some large amount, although it does vary by party. And now with Trump being skeptical of trade, many Republicans are pretty skeptical of trade. But yeah, so I just don't see that there's a political package that you can do with the TPP, like specific terms that would get through Congress. So that when I think of domestic politics, I'm thinking of how legislation could get passed by Congress, and I don't see a package of provisions that could appeal to enough people to get passed. And I think the Obama administration tried really hard. The Republicans were in control of Congress at the time. The Obama administration tried really hard to put together a package that would pass. I think they made some mistakes, and I think that's why we didn't end up seeing it passed. But when I look at it today, like I just don't know what the Biden administration could ask for in a renegotiated set of TPP rules that would be able to appeal to the other parties that they would actually agree to, and then could get through Congress. For the Biden administration, they're really focused on labor rights and climate change. You could imagine in theory, you take some of the things they did in USMCA, this sort of very enhanced labor rights protections, to put it in general terms. And if you took something like that and put in some, much stronger provisions on climate change, if you could get all the other CPTPP members to agree to that, you would then take it to Congress, who would probably reject it. So I just don't see, in terms of domestic politics, how the Biden administration can do anything with CPTPP, and that's why they're not. There's talk of them doing a digital trade pact, in Asia, so something more limited. You would take kind of one of the chapters of CPTPP and make that the agreement. And I think they're even a little reluctant to do that. Again, they're not sure how to sell this to their constituencies. If you could do a digital trade pact that the Biden administration could market as worker-centered somehow, and not too much a giveaway to big tech, maybe in theory you could do it, but I think it's a challenge, and I think that's why they've avoided this, because it's not clear how it would work. It would look bad to undertake this big initiative and have it fail. They see it hurting them more hurting the Democrats more than helping. So this is an area where I would say, we're already into the next election stage here in the United States. We have the midterm congressional elections next year. Maybe after that, the Biden administration could put together some plan, for trade integration with Asia. But I'm not even hopeful that will be time enough. I think we might have to wait until the next presidential term to really get anything here.
Let me add a dimension as we hear Anna on this too. I just want to add a small dimension, which is because Anna's so deep in the sort of congressional world, and all these politics are your daily experience. It seems like there's a very almost ironic tension here between, separate from China, there's all these concerns about sort of the kind of trade agreement that the CPTPP represents. But the China threat, as it's understood, also helps to drive a lot of things forward. So if you have any particular thing you want to get forward in Congress, you can sort of present it as, we have to do this in order to combat China. So with CPTPP, it seems like those two things are like precisely aligned against each other. There's going to be some people who are and already have started saying things like, we have to, look, China's joining it. Like we have to, that's the China threat. And then the other people are saying, no, but forget China. We don't like these kinds of agreements. So like, how do you see that play out?
Well, so I actually think, Neysun, that the China element here is perhaps the strongest reason why we might see movement towards reconsidering joining CPTPP. And that's because although the detractors when it comes to TPP have been bipartisan for a long time now. In the 2016 election, both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump pledged to ensure that the US did not join. But we also hear in our meetings on the Hill from both sides of the aisle a desire to see the US reconsider. And I would be on the lookout for proposals or resolutions that indicate that are coming, in fact, even from Republicans. But, I think it is ironic because there are so many things that members of Congress that are spun up about when it comes to the US-China relationship and want to get accomplished. Some big ones are things like ensuring that we're not over-reliant on China in our supply chains, and that some of our critical supply chains are diversified, and ideally either manufacturing is brought back to the United States or some of it's brought back to the Western Hemisphere. Then there's the fact that many members of Congress, especially the ones that are focused on the more military and strategic components of the relationship, are very insistent that we need to be forward deploying more aircraft carriers into the South China Sea and just the Asia Pacific region in general to try to discourage any sort of conflict over Taiwan. Make of that what you will, whether or not that would actually discourage conflict. But if we're going to be trying to build up our physical presence, our military presence in the Asia Pacific region, we need to sweeten the deal with allies and partners. And one way to do that is to join this trade pact, right? And then also, if we want to decrease reliance on China for various things, especially critical materials for tech, like lithium, for example. Australia is one of the big suppliers, and Chile has more than half of the world's reserves, and both of them are members of the TPP. Like these are compatible interests, the CPTPP and addressing the China challenge in various ways that members of Congress seem to think are best. But we're not there yet. And one of the reasons we're not there yet is because the Biden administration hasn't prioritized trade for its first year in office. They've really focused on addressing domestic priorities first, whether that's recovering from COVID or thinking through and proposing solutions for revitalizing the US economy here at home. And trade is kind of on the back burner as they review their policies. They haven't even asked Congress to reauthorize the Trade Promotion Authority that is so necessary for administrations to get negotiations done. So I don't think that we're going to see this in the immediate term, regardless of whether or not we see bipartisan support coalesce around it. But I do think that there are natural reasons why both parties might be seriously reconsidering.
Great. Yeah, I think it's a wonderful answer that at least helped me a lot. The understanding the U.S. Thinking involving domestic politics, midterm elections, and all that next year. So maybe our Chinese scholars can also comment on that. What if the U.S. wants to rejoin the CPTPP? Would China be happy to see that?
Yes, I think that let me say something about that question. I think that China is welcoming all the countries to join the agreement, not only for the final version, but also in the negotiation. Actually, like what we are doing in the WTO to talking about the e-commerce with United States and other economies like EU, I think that we still have a lot of things to face, especially after the WTO in 1995, there are already more than almost 26 years past. There's no other new agreements reached by the parties, except for the facilitation agreement. It's not a brand new things to do with the e-commerce, with different kind of trading services. Actually, we are seeing there are lot more pressures, not only to China, but also to United States and to other countries after the COVID-19. We are seeing more pressures to stop the traditional ways we are dealing with each other. So for United States, I always welcome United States to cooperate with us, not only for the national level, but also for the state level or the enterprises. We are seeing that the investment from United States are important to playing important role in China, as you may find that according to the data in the 2020, the FDI, the global FDI inflows has dropped about 1/3, while the only region in the world is the Asian region that has a increase of the inflows of FDI. So I think that China is attracting more investment. We are providing new chances and opportunities to United States enterprises to invest here, to use the opportunities. And we also hope that, a lot of Chinese enterprises ask me whether they can, be available or to use the opportunities for the Biden administration to update the infrastructure in the United States or building back better, a lot of things they can do. They can provide better services and, everything according to the terms of the contract. So I believe that we welcome the negotiation or different kind of discussion about the rules, about the agreement between China and the United States, especially when United States initiates TPP. And there are a lot of chapters that are according to the United States, decision. Or so I do believe that we have a very strong base, better or further discussion about the future agreements between our two countries, or even for the plural agreements among countries.
Professor Chen posed a very interesting question. I remember on an occasion, probably not very official, that China once expressed its attitude, saying that US is very much welcome to join the RCEP. We understand that China probably is not in a position to say, okay, if we can join CPTPP, then the US is welcome back to rejoin CPTPP again. Because right now, China, the prospect for China to join the CPTPP and whether and when China can join the CPTPP remains unclear. But for RCEP, since China is already a member country there, although China many times said that, okay, RCEP is not a China-led agreement, it's ASEAN country-led agreement. But China is in a position as a member country of RCEP to welcome outsiders such as the US to join the RCEP. So even for Belt and Road Initiative, China also expressed clearly its attitude welcoming US. If US is interested, it's very much welcome to participate in BRI as well. So I think for Asia Pacific region, from the perspective of international economic and trade agreement, if RCEP and CPTPP can converge in the future, of course, it's an ideal situation. I'm not sure whether it will happen or not. I think it's good for the region and it's also good for the world.
So we've been talking about these big multilateral, agreements or frameworks, but let's come back to just the US-China bilateral relationship. What is the sense of all of you as to whether or not some kind of a new US-China trade agreement is possible? Maybe we can start with Simon on the US side. This phase 1 trade agreement that was, greeted with, I think, a certain amount of maybe positive reaction from many people in the US trade community, thinking that it actually, not only were the purchase commitments attractive, but there was some stuff in there about intellectual property. There was some other stuff that sort of signaled maybe like a potential phase 2 agreement down the line that people thought wasn't bad. And so I'm curious, that all happened before COVID and a lot's happened since the phase 1 agreement. I know that there's questions about, whether the purchase commitments are being met. And we've already talked a little bit about the notion of a Section 301 investigation on subsidies practices. But, stepping back from that, do you see, one, a need for, and then two, a possibility for kind of a new trade agreement sometime in the course of the next few years of the Biden administration?
I think it's possible. I mean, it's an option that's out there. I don't know how likely it is. I mean, so as we've talked about, we're in the midst of this review that the Biden administration is undertaking of its China trade policy, and when that is completed, they'll sort of go forward in some direction, presumably. And one possible direction is, look, we'll sit down with China again and look at the phase 1 deal and see what worked and what didn't work, and come up with a phase 2. We'll bring in issues like subsidies, state-owned enterprises, the things that weren't covered initially, and make that the focus. I would see that as a somewhat positive approach. I mean, there were things in the phase 1 deal that I thought were good. There were some that I thought weren't so good. If we could make a phase 2 deal better and improve on phase 1, I think that would be, a good outcome. I don't know what the Biden administration will think of that. Will they like that idea? The Trump administration did a phase 1 deal in a way that they didn't have to go to Congress. And, because of maybe the uniqueness of Trump, they could get away with that. I'm not sure that the Biden administration would be able to do it the same way. And they might have to do it in a way, or feel compelled, or feel pushed to do it in a way that Congress signs off on it. And that makes it a lot more complicated. So, I think I'm a little skeptical that we'll actually see that. And the Biden administration, again, they are wary of trade deals in general. I just don't think they want to be kind of sucked into negotiating trade agreements that then have to then play out a certain way in domestic politics. So I guess my answer is I think it's probably a good idea for the Biden administration to do something like that, to make a renegotiated U.S.-China trade deal an important part of their China trade policy and trade policy in general. But I think I'm a little skeptical that they will conclude that it's worth doing, at least now. Maybe we get there at some point, but I don't feel like that's going to be the starting point. Let's say they do this Section 301 investigation on subsidies and they complete their review. All right, what do they do next? I don't feel like renegotiate the U.S.-China trade deal, get to phase 2. Is going to be at the top of their agenda, but it maybe they get to a point where they feel like it's necessary and there's some specific something that can be gained from it, and maybe they can bring in the Europeans as well, although that's going to be hard. So I think those are my very rough thoughts on that. It's sort of we're at sort of the speculative stage, and I'm just not sure, but so that's where I am with it at the moment.
Well, ZHOU Mi or Jingxia, do you think that if the U.S. side wanted to pursue another trade agreement, would there be receptivity on the Chinese side? And what kind of a trade agreement would be attractive to the Chinese side?
So I think given the continued and actual presence of economic connections in the two countries, the US and China need a better mechanism for resolving their problems and maintain effective communication or dialogue on trade issues. So in this sense, I personally recommend that the US and China should reopen trade negotiations. But there are 2 points I would like to emphasize here. The first, the phase 2 talks, if have, unlike the phase 1 trade deal, more focusing on managed trade, purchasing commitments from China, the phase 2 talks will be more focusing on market access, regulatory transparency, national treatment, and intellectual property protections. They are more regulatory aspects. So these problems, these issues are more sensitive and are more harder to negotiation between China and the US. So this is the first point I would like to emphasize. Second, since China and the EU concluded a so-called comprehensive agreement on investment, for short, it's CAI. So as you can see, unlike phase 1 trade deal, CAI is more balanced. It's a trade agreement. It's a international treaty. It's not like phase 1 deal. It's in nature, it's a executive agreement. So from its content, we can see CAI is more balanced, and the phase 1 deal is more focusing on managed trade and more one-sided. If you look at the text, you will see there are 105 China shell and 5 US shell and more than 70 both party shell. So it's not that balanced trade. I think if China and the US launch the trade phase 2 trade talks, from China's side, it might require similar with CAI, probably, China will require a more balanced trade agreement. These are 2 aspects I would like to emphasize.
Did you want to weigh in, ZHOU Mi?
Yeah, okay. So I agree with Professor Shi's opinion on the next phrase of discussion or agreement. Actually, it is very important for both of China and the United States to have a formal agreement, like for the international agreement, not only an executive agreement between the then government, the branch of White House. We should have some more legal agreements to try to make certain environment for the general situation, the environment between our two countries. I think that for the phase 2 or what the name will be, I don't think it's just a kind of requirement from the United States or from China. As you may find that even for the phase 1 agreement, we didn't try to just do exactly as this or Trump administration require us to do. Even for the final context of the agreement, you can still find that even for the purchase from the United States, we should based on the market. We should respect the market on the prices, on the different kind of sustainability. Heard from that we just canceled some import of soybeans from the United States because of the hurricane. And I think that will be a lot of different occasions, different events. That is a very important reason why we should have an agreement. Because that without the agreement, everything should only be temporary. And without agreement, there will be a lot of changes. Another government come to another kind of administration, come to the White House and say that we want to do something else. So for the big economies of China and the United States, I still think that for the agreement between us, we should not only try to focus on what China should do, also want to do something to improve the fairness between the trade between our two countries. Like for the Huawei, we haven't seen any of the so alleged some kind of accusation. I do believe that the limitation of the export of silicon, of the chips, have made the global supply chain a lot of fragile, not only for the mobile, but also for the automobile, for different kind of things. So I believe the agreement it will never be just from unilateral willingness. I do believe that we are needing each other and for a lot of reconstruction or recovery between two countries.
Okay, maybe we can go one step further and ask maybe a bigger question. That is, in your view, what is the strategic vision of China and the US when it comes to the trade relationship? So what's the end goal for each government? What do they want to achieve in this relationship? Maybe you can start with Simon.
You can start with me. I'm not sure I can give you a great answer. It doesn't seem to me that the Biden administration has a big strategic vision at the moment. I mean, you can imagine a strategic vision that they might have, like we're going to push China to restructure its economy, or maybe we can use domestic mechanisms to better adapt to trade with China. I mean, these are possible visions. It seems to me that at the moment, they are, as part of this review, trying to develop some sort of vision, perhaps strategic to some extent. As I've said before, I don't think that trade and China, I think they've emphasized other issues. So as Anna's pointed out, I mean, domestic policy issues have been at the forefront. And as I've said, I think sort of in the international arena, I mean, climate is big, and labor rights are pushing for labor rights to get into the WTO. And so I don't think there's a strategic vision on the table right now from the Biden administration for U.S.-China trade, and I'm not really sure when we'll see it. When this review is complete, when they announce we're taking this action on Section 301 or something else, maybe we can evaluate a little better what their strategic vision is. But for the moment, I don't see their vision.
So Professor SHI Jingxia, Do you see a vision from China?
Me neither. Totally, completely on the side with Simon. Neither I see strategic vision from the U.S. side, from the Biden administration, but also from Chinese side. Probably there's some vision there, but not strategic vision. But at least I don't think the two economies, particularly from economically speaking, the two economies should decouple with each other.
Okay.
Anna, ZHOU Mi, do you have the same views, or are either one of you more optimistic?
Yeah, sorry, what was the question again?
Whether you could speak to both, but especially in your case, does the Chinese government have a real strategic vision for what they want out of the US-China trade relationship?
Yeah, I think that we have a several different kind of definitions between the bilateral relationship between China. We value the economic relationship between United States and China. We said that it is the very important pillar for the bilateral relationship between our countries. I do believe that in the past decade, China benefits a lot from the cooperation with the United States. We provide a lot of opportunities to the United States, and the United States help us to build our industries. I think that is a kind of a very real level. And when we're looking at the international rule level, we are learning a lot from the practice of the United States and also from WTO, from other countries. I do believe that it is our, idea. We can cooperate with each other. We do not want to take the place of the United States. We want to expand the different levels of cooperation, but the result is not just to replace the United States. I think that I believe there are a lot of differences between us, and without enough information exchange, there will be more misunderstanding between us. So for China, I think that strategic target for us, the most important one is to have a very strong support to our people in China to have a better life. But how can we reach that? We should try to cooperate with the United States. That is my understanding about what we want from the bilateral relationship between China and the United States.
And Anna, as you take a stab at this, let me invite you to speak to not only the presence of a strategic vision at the level of the Biden administration, but maybe within the larger policymaking community, environment, which includes the business community that you're so closely connected to.
Absolutely. So, I think that the one thing that both parties seem able to agree on is the importance of remaining competitive vis-a-vis China. But beyond that, I don't see much of an articulation of a clear strategic vision yet from any corner. And I think that's partly because there's a lot of tension between those who see remaining competitive as something that can only be accomplished in a zero-sum way, and those who see remaining competitive as something that actually requires us to continue to be interdependent economically. The business community definitely falls into the second category. And it's funny that there would be anyone on the defense side or the more hawkish side of this conversation who doesn't appreciate the value of economic interdependence, because wasn't it, traditionally a fundamental principle of deterrence that if you're more economically interdependent, you're less likely to end up in conflict. But here we are in a situation where trade issues, commercial issues, and defense and national security issues are so intertwined and so conflated with each other. It's hard to even label issues as one or the other. And there certainly are a lot of people in the policy discussion who feel that all of our trade ties are vulnerabilities. The business community sees a situation where most of them are in China for China, as they say. You know, the China market is this enormous opportunity for them right now and promises to be an even greater opportunity in the future. We've got a middle class that's bigger than the US population, like more than twice as big, and is supposed to make up more than a quarter of the global middle class by the end of this decade. That is a market like the world has never seen. And many of our companies are at pains to emphasize to policymakers that if they are going to remain globally competitive, if they are going to do things like continue to drive technological advancement in the United States by funding cutting edge research and development, they have to be able to participate in the China market. They can't be globally competitive without the China market. I'm not sure that that's falling on enough receptive ears yet, though. And I think one of the biggest challenges we have in the United States when we're talking about China policy is that there are lots of people who are looking at their policy choices without fully understanding the consequences of various options. And we need to improve upon that.
That's very helpful, and this has been such a great conversation generally. You know, we don't want to take up too much of your time, so maybe we can conclude with one last question out of you know, this mix of all these different things we've talked about. One thing that would be great to hear is from each of you your particular best idea for this general, you know, landscape that we've been talking about, the U.S.-China relationship, and maybe we could set it up as, you know, for Simon or Anna, if you suddenly got a call from the White House and President Biden wants to meet with you and you have 10 minutes to pitch him on your single best idea, or ZHOU Mi or SHI Jingxia on your side, if you get a call from Zhongnanhai and they say that President Xi wants to meet with you and you have 10 minutes to pitch him with your best idea, what would that be? Give us the preview of what you would say, and maybe we could start with SHI Jingxia, and everyone just give us your best idea.
Absolutely. Frankly speaking, in recent years, we have been seeing China-US relationship, unfortunately, are going to have been hard-nosed and tense, while at the same time, the balance of interests on both sides likely will control hostile impulses, placing the relationship in a state of hardening competition that coexists alongside a mutual awareness that both sides will be impacted for good or ill. So here, if I may quote the wisdom of Hillary Clinton in quite a few years, managed competition between China and the US can serve both better. To this end, it is advisable that both the United States and China should be in a search of a formula to manage that trade relationship for the decades ahead. Although a framework of managed competition would be difficult to construct, but still doing so is possible. As Dr. Henry Kissinger once said during the Cold War, we know what we must do. We also know what we can do. It only remains to do it. With this, I end my remarks. Thank you very much.
Who's next with their great idea?
I'll jump in. To be honest, I'm a little bored with all my ideas for the Biden administration. You know, I've said this sort of thing over and over. You know, bring back WTO dispute settlement, work with allies to take on China. So I'm going to go in a different direction. I'm going to have a suggestion for China. Maybe my ideas for the Biden administration are good, maybe not. but like I said, I'm just bored with them. So my idea for China is that I think China and everyone else would greatly benefit from a surprise liberalization move. So for example, China's been negotiating accession to the WTO's government procurement agreement for a long time. And I think other members are a little skeptical of the offers that China has made, and so China hasn't got in yet. I think China could disrupt a lot of the narrative that's out there and catch everyone off guard if they came forward with a strongly liberalizing proposal to join. Now, you could see China's application to join the CPTPP is along the same lines. I think that CPTPP is broader in scope and therefore it's more difficult. But China could use that opportunity similarly to to propose reforms to its state-owned enterprises to actually comply with the CPTPP rules. I think that one's be a little more difficult. So I'm going to sort of make it more realistic possibly and say just focus on something like the agreement on government procurement, make a great offer, surprise everyone, throw everyone off, and capture some headlines. So that's my great idea.
Anna, ZHOU Mi, what are your big ideas for either side? I guess if one of you got to meet with the other counterpart's president, what would you say? ZHOU Mi, do you have a suggestion for the US side?
Okay. I haven't thought about this idea before, as you mentioned, to talk about the possibility of the cooperation between or dealing with the Biden administration. Actually, in my understanding, that I would say that the competition is necessary and it's good if it's in the good condition, not just trying to do some like to bullet others. So I would like to welcome the competition, but the competition should have some rules. The rules should be based on something, not only ideology or the human rights or other kind of related things, should be based on the economic laws. So that is my suggestion. So I would think that when we are trying to do something, we should not only trying to think about the people in the United States, like the so-called the people-centric policy of United States trade policies. The people is not only in United States, Chinese people are also people. So I think that both governments should try to respect the human rights of both people. That is my idea for the United States, president. If I will give some suggestion to our leader. I would say that I would recommend there were at least two things we should remember. The first one is that the communication is always better than not communication. So I would suggest that even in the post-COVID time, we should try to re-establish the communication and try to make better communication support for the people to face-to-face talk, like we recognize the vaccines from other countries. We are trying to establish better coordination in the related administration of the virus spread. That is one of my suggestions. We should try to support the people flow. That is important. And the second is that I would say that there are lots of friends in the United States. We should not always say United States as a whole. They have a different kind of people from different states, different parties, or different kind of communities. So we should try to establish the better and diversified economic relationship with them. We should not only dealing the problems with the Washington, D.C. itself.
I think if I could say something to both sides, the first thing I would say would be, please put down the ideological rhetoric. The reality is that there's a long history here of our two countries having some significant ideological differences in our systems, and nonetheless finding pretty robust ways to engage and gain benefit on both sides. Our commercial engagement has been beneficial for both of our economies and the global economy for quite some time. And we don't have to resolve our ideological differences in order to continue down a path where there is mutual benefit for us in the relationship. And then the second one is to get our priorities straight. I would really like both countries to remember that these are the two most powerful economies, the two politically most powerful countries in the world. And there are much bigger problems than either our ideological differences or our anxieties about how various technologies might impede our national security. And the biggest one is climate change. And climate change cannot be addressed successfully if we are not cooperating with each other to address it. I think that there are plenty of people in both countries and in both governments who, if pressed, would acknowledge that. And none of the other issues in our relationship are going to matter very much if we can't work together to do something soon and quickly and effectively to address that.
Great. Well, this has been a terrific conversation. Thanks to all of you for participating. I learned a lot. It was great to see you all across lots of distances. Let me turn it over to CHEN Dingding to close us out.
No, actually, it's been a terrific discussion for the last hour and half. And I certainly have learned a lot for me. And I really hope that we can continue this kind of discussion, next time, to include more speakers, to talk about the more topics that are relevant to US-China relations. And I do appreciate all of you for spending so much time on, wonderful evening on your side, and Dr. ZHOU Mi and Professor SHI Jingxia for staying up so late. I just want to thank you all very much again. Thank you.
And I hope the audience who watches this online enjoys it as well, and subscribe to our channel. We hope to bring you more conversations like this in the near future. Goodbye for now.